afternoon. I'm coming to you live from my home in Auburn, and I hope you guys are having a great, it's looking pretty snowy outside my house, a great snowy day. My kids had the day off from school. We've all been getting over a bug, and apparently everyone at school is too, and so they canceled school for sickness and also for snow in advance. And so I am very glad not to be driving home from school right now, but snug in my house very near the wood stove. Anyway, we are going to be talking about education a little bit today as we have this snow day, and talking about Maine students' test scores and the legislature and all of that, and revisionist history. Maybe not, revisionist history might be the wrong word, but yes, we're gonna be talking about all of those things. And so hang in for the ride, and let me know your questions in the comments. I would love to know where you're tuning in from and your questions as we chat. So I saw an article late yesterday afternoon, and then I finally read it today in the Bangor Daily News, and it is entitled, "Maine Lawmakers Are Frustrated with the Mills Administration Over Low Student Test Scores." And apparently there was a meeting between the Education Legislative Committee yesterday and Department of Education officials. And at that meeting, of course, these low test scores that we shared about last week came up. And if you don't know what I'm referencing, the NAEP released Maine students' test scores for math and reading in 4th and 8th grade last week. Hey, Ernie, thanks for saying hi from Richmond. So those test scores were released last week, and now the Department of Education was in the Education Committee yesterday answering questions, including about those test scores. So just a refresher, the NAEP test scores showed that Maine students' test scores were the very worst that they have been in 30 years. And so we've got like a third of 4th graders that are proficient at math, a third of 4th graders that are proficient at grade level for math. And then we have 26%, only 26% of 4th and 8th graders are reading at grade level. A quarter of Maine's 4th and 8th graders can read at grade level. That is appalling. And so, rightfully so, the Education Committee was asking the Department of Education about this and looking for some accountability. So that's the topic of this news article in the Bangor Daily News. And I was reading it, and I noted a couple of quotes, and I'm going to read them to you. One of them is from Senate Majority Leader Teresa Peirce. She is a Democrat from Falmouth, and here is her quote. "I am trying to field the calls of people who are like, hey, we used to be really at the top and it feels like we're not," Senate Majority Leader Teresa Peirce, D from Falmouth, said. So apparently Senator Peirce is fielding phone calls from people who are saying, hey, we used to be doing a really good job here in Maine at education, and now we're not. That is quote number one. Quote number two is from Representative Holly Sargent, Democrat from York. And Rep. Holly Sargent, D. York, pointed out and said that the Education Department's answers Wednesday on the NAEP results were not sufficient. I'm very, very, very unhappy, Sargent said. So Representative Holly Sargent is very, very, very unhappy, at least with the answers yesterday, uncertain if that is also with the test results themselves. And certainly there is blame to go around. There is there are plenty of questions to ask the Department of Education. In fact, will we'll get to that in a moment. But I will remind folks who has been in charge of the legislature for the last most of 50 years. We did have the House majority for 2 years, yes, in the somewhat recent but now receding past. But the Democrats have pretty much held the legislature for most of the last 50 years. And, but let's talk about the DOE for a minute, because 2 years ago, in 2023, the Department of Education, Pender Macon, in fact, Pender Macon, who is the Department of Education Commissioner appointed by Governor Janet Mills, came to this same legislative committee, okay, the Education Committee, and gave an update on the state of education in Maine. And if you remember, use that like way back machine 2 years ago. If you remember 2 years ago, Pender Macon had a lot to say about social emotional learning and making sure that kids were ready to learn before we actually taught them anything. And so in 2023, she said to this legislative committee, she said, academic learning is definitely going to take a back seat to all of these other pieces. So let me repeat, 2 years ago, just 2 years ago in 2023, Pender Macon, the head honcho at the Maine Department of Education, said, academic learning is definitely going to take a back seat to all of these other pieces. She said that math, traditional academic learning should be a lower priority than social emotional learning. Because kids have to be ready to learn before they can learn. And so that has been the mindset for how many years now? Hey Todd, thanks for saying hi from Pownell. And so that's the backdrop here. But why is this pertinent in this discussion and talking about an article from yesterday in regards to this conversation that now in 2025 the Department of Education is having with the Education Committee? Well, we have got legislators like Senator Teresa Peirce and Representative Holly Sargent who are shocked at these test results. And they are shocking test results, and we should all be shocked at them because they're terrible. And Maine students are being failed by the current school system. But let's use the Wayback Machine again. This time it's ballotpedia.com, and look up who was on the Education Committee 2 years ago when Pender Macon came and told that legislative committee that actual nuts and bolts of education would have to take a back seat because there were other priorities that the DOE was going to be advancing besides academic learning. Lo and behold, Senator Teresa Peirce and Representative Holly Sargent, both on the committee. That is according to ballotpedia.com, last updated as far as the 23 and 24 legislative session and the makeup of the Education Committee in September of 2023. So both Senator Peirce and Holly Sargent were on the committee. We're told by Pender Macon that she was going to have academic learning take a back seat to other concerns and making sure that social emotional concerns were front and center because academic learning couldn't happen until that area was squared away. They were there for that conversation. How can you then now be shocked at test results that continue to plummet, go down the toilet, when the focus of the Department of Education was explained to you 2 years ago and you by all accounts supported it? Listen, yes, the Department of Education is also complicit here, but the legislature passes the laws and holds that department accountable. And who has been running it for most of the last 50 years? The Democrat majority. So I don't really want to hear manufactured outrage from Senator Peirce or Representative Holly Sargent because they are absolutely complicit in what is going on in Maine schools. What I would like to hear from both of them is support for school choice. Because if they're truly shocked at these students' test scores, and they truly think that we need to see a change in order to make sure that Maine students are getting the best education they could, then let's do this. Let's not have the legislature in the driver's seat. Let's not have the DOE in the driver's seat. Let's have parents and students and families in the driver's seat for who is determining what the best education is for each of those children and for those families, instead of mandating the same continued failing system that has not been working for Maine families and is ever so clear with the most recent test scores, which are not shocking. These test scores are not shocking, Senator Peirce and Representative Sargent. These are not shocking because these are the policies that you and your cohort have put into play over the last many years. And it is not surprising that they are failing Maine students because Maine students are not one size fits all. And this education model that is being pushed on students and families with no flexibility and no concern for every student's varied needs is not working. So when you read articles like this and you see the outrage and the how dare you Department of Education fail our students like this, let's just remember these are the same folks who were in the driver's seat 2 years ago, who were cheering or at least approving of the agenda that the Department of Education was advancing at that time, and by all accounts continues to advance, but isn't working. And so it's time to not have Senator Peirce and Representative Sargent and the others who have not fixed the system. It's time to not have them in the driver's seat anymore. And so that is the little inside scoop as you read. You know, it just is funny to me that that took all of 10 minutes to look up and say, hey, who was on that education committee a couple years ago? I remember the last time they had an update from the DOE that was reported in the media. And I seem to remember not a heck of a lot of outrage or anything at the time, but now that students' test scores have fallen even further. And now, this is probably the key part, now that I'm getting phone calls about it, now it's a problem. So that's a scoop for you on this Thursday afternoon. I will put a link to that article in the comments. You guys can read it for yourselves. And you know what, while I'm at it, I'll put a link to that Ballotpedia in the comments as well. So love to hear your thoughts. Not an investigative journalist over here, just putting 2 and 2 together. And I would advise you to do the same when you read what is coming out in the media these days so that you can be fully informed and know what is going on in our state, in Augusta. And let's take back control of our students' education and implement school choice. And I'm sure, following the manufactured outrage on those students' test scores that we heard about yesterday, that we can count on Senator Peirce and Representative Holly Sargent for their support for school choice this coming legislative session. Thanks for tuning in, you guys. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday.